Vanessa Langley, 36 years old, born and raised in Savannah, Georgia. I always believed in true love. I was that girl who dreamed of candlelit dinners and forever and alwayses. I pictured white picket fences and Sunday brunches with a growing family, a picture-perfect life painted with the broadest strokes of unwavering affection and mutual respect. That dream, that deep-seated fantasy of marital bliss, was the very bedrock of my early 20s. I poured my heart into that ideal, convinced that if I gave enough, love would surely blossom and endure. But what I got was a husband who turned into a stranger, a man whose charm curdled into something cold and controlling. The whispered sweet nothings transformed into sharp critiques, the shared dreams into his singular ambitions. He became an edifice of smugness, a man whose presence was less about partnership and more about petty dominance. And then there was that final, unforgettable moment. A smug smirk plastered across his face in the courtroom as we signed the divorce papers. I'll never forget how he scoffed, how he laughed, a low, guttural sound, like he'd won something monumental, a conqueror surveying his easily vanquished foe. It was dismissive, arrogant, and utterly devoid of any lingering humanity, as if I was nothing more than an inconvenient footnote in his grand narrative. But what he didn't know, what that snickering man utterly failed to grasp, is that I was no longer the woman he thought he'd crushed. He saw the gentle, accommodating Southern girl he'd married, the one who'd quietly supported his endeavors and silently swallowed his barbs. He saw a convenient stepping stone, a background character in his unfolding drama. He thought he'd broken me, reduced me to a pile of emotional rubble, easy to walk over on his way to his next conquest, his next fleeting success. He never once imagined the steel that had been forging deep within me, the quiet transformation that had been occurring right under his dismissive gaze. He didn't see the silent resolve, the burning ambition that had been ignited by his callous disregard. He didn't understand that his cruelty had inadvertently given me a strength I never knew I possessed. At that final hearing, the air in the courtroom was thick with unspoken tension, heavy with the weight of shattered expectations and cold legalities. He sat opposite me, radiating an obnoxious confidence, his eyes barely concealing his triumph. Then everything changed. As the judge, a stoic man with a kind but firm voice, began to read out the number, a figure so immense it seemed to ripple through the hushed room, the color drained from Brandon's face. His triumphant smirk evaporated, replaced by a ghastly pallor and a look of utter, profound bewilderment. He looked broken, confused, and utterly exposed. The man who had laughed moments before was suddenly pale and speechless. It was in that precise moment, witnessing his shock, that I knew I had not just survived, but irrevocably, undeniably thrived. Have you ever been underestimated like that? By someone who once claimed to love you, someone who actively worked to diminish your spirit and potential? Someone who saw your kindness as weakness and your support as an entitlement? Drop your story in the comments below. Let's share those moments where we were written off, only to rise beyond their wildest assumptions. And if you're ready to hear how I turned that betrayal, that deep cut of disrespect, into $1 billion revenge, a quiet, powerful vindication that roared without me having to utter a single word, make sure you like, subscribe, and stick around. You won't want to miss how this story truly unfolds. It seems like eons ago, but I can still picture the exact moment I met Brandon. It was sophomore year at the University of Georgia, a sweltering August day, and I was huddled over a statistics textbook in the student union, probably trying to avoid the scorching heat outside. He walked in, all confident swagger and disarming smiles, a business major with a future already mapped out. Brandon Langley was the type of man who commanded attention without even trying. Tall, perfectly coiffed dark hair, eyes that sparkled when he laughed, and a voice that just oozed charm. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, even in a crowded cafeteria. He had ambitions as big as the state of Georgia itself, talking endlessly about venture capital, market trends, and building an empire. He wasn't just dreaming. He was strategizing, already years ahead of most of our classmates. He came from money, old Atlanta money, with connections that stretched like kudzu vines across the Southeast. His family name carried weight, opening doors that most of us didn't even know existed. My background, on the other hand, was a little more grounded. Savannah born and raised from a family who believed in hard work and making every dollar stretch. My parents weren't poor, but we certainly weren't in Brandon's league financially. I was at UGA on partial scholarship, working part-time jobs to make ends meet, acutely aware of every penny spent. The concept of old money was just something I'd read about in novels, not something I expected to encounter, let alone fall in love with. Despite our differing worlds, there was an undeniable magnetism between us. He was drawn to my quiet resilience, my artistic bent, and maybe, just maybe, the novelty of someone who wasn't impressed by his family name alone. I was captivated by his drive, his undeniable charisma, and the way he made me feel like anything was possible. He saw potential in me, he said, a spark that he could fan into a flame. It felt like a fairy tale, honestly. The Southern belle from modest roots falling for the dashing, ambitious man from wealth. We were inseparable through college, and 2 years after graduation, we stood in a beautiful historic church in Savannah exchanging vows. The RST 2 years of our marriage were, for lack of a better word, perfect. We bought a charming house on the outskirts of Atlanta, a blend of traditional Southern architecture with modern touches. Brandon's career was taking off, just as he predicted it would, and I was dabbling in design, finding my feet in the corporate world. We took spontaneous weekend trips, hosted lively dinner parties, and still had those candlelit dinners I'd always dreamed of. He was attentive, affectionate, and my biggest cheerleader. We talked about children, about our future, about growing old together. It felt like we were building something truly special, a life rooted in love and shared aspirations. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, money and ambition started to shift things. It wasn't a sudden crack, but a subtle erosion. Brandon's pursuit of success became all-consuming. The easy laughter grew rarer, replaced by a focused intensity that felt less like passion and more like obsession. His world started to revolve entirely around deals, investments, and projections, leaving less and less room for anything else. The man I married, the one who adored my artistic nature and gentle spirit, began to see the world through a different lens, one where everything had a price, and everyone had a purpose, usually in service of his own advancement. I didn't realize it then, but the perfect facade was just starting to show its first hairline fractures. The initial perfection of our early marriage started to chip away, not with a bang, but with insidious, quiet shifts. Beneath the perfectly tailored suits and the gleaming Rolex, Brandon's charm began to reveal its true, colder nature. What I once admired as confidence slowly morphed into controlling behavior. It started subtly, innocent suggestions about my clothes, my friends, my schedule. Are you really going to wear that? It doesn't quite suit you. Do you really need to see Renee again this week? Then came the belittling remarks, always disguised as jokes. At dinner parties, he'd mock my Southern accent, or my occasional ditzy moments. Oh, Vanessa always gets so flustered with numbers. Bless her heart. Or, my little design guru here thinks she can change the world with pretty colors. Isn't that cute? His laughter would be loud, inviting others to join in, leaving me feeling small and exposed. If I ever challenged him, even gently, he'd turn it around, accusing me of being too sensitive, humorless, or unsupportive. It was just a joke, Vanessa. You're overreacting. Can't you take a little teasing? The late nights began to add up too. Business dinners, client meetings, networking events. He'd come home later and later, sometimes smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine, but he always had an airtight explanation delivered with that charming, persuasive smile. You know how these high-stakes deals are, honey. Lots of schmoozing. I wanted to believe him desperately. I wanted to see the man I married, he one who promised forever and always. But a nagging feeling, a cold knot in my stomach, told me something wasn't right. I began sensing emotional manipulation, a calculated dance where he'd twist my perceptions and make me doubt my own sanity. He'd deny things he'd said moments before, or blame me for his bad moods, his stress. This gaslighting made me feel constantly off-kilter, trapped in a reality that shifted to suit his narrative. It was dizzying, isolating. I started to question my instincts, my judgment, everything. He slowly chipped away at my self-worth until I felt like a shadow of my former self. In that oppressive atmosphere, I desperately needed an escape, an anchor. I started rediscovering a passion I'd put aside in the whirlwind of our early relationship, technology and design. Years ago, I'd briefly considered a degree in computer science before pivoting to graphic design, always fascinated by how art and logic could intertwine. Now, I found myself drawn back to it. I'd spend hours after he went to bed, or while he was out schmoozing, poring over online courses, learning new coding languages, exploring the world of AI and its applications in creative fields. It began as a quiet rebellion, a way to reclaim a piece of myself that felt lost. It was an intellectual challenge that soothed my frayed nerves and quieted the doubt in my mind. It was a space where his constant judgment couldn't reach me. I poured my frustrations, my suppressed anxiety, my burgeoning independence into lines of code and intricate wireframes. The algorithms didn't judge. They simply worked or didn't, offering a clarity I desperately craved. This wasn't just a hobby. It was a lifeline. It was an emotional escape, yes, but unknowingly, it was also the silent forging of the very weapon that would one day shatter his carefully constructed world. He might have been busy building his empire of lies, but I was quietly, painstakingly laying the foundations for my opium. The more I delved into the world of tech and design, the more I saw not just an escape, but a vast ocean of possibility. I started to conceptualize an idea that truly excited me, an AI-driven design platform. It wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about efficiency, personalization, and democratizing high-quality design for everyone. I imagined a tool that could understand a user's vision and translate it into stunning, effective visuals with unprecedented speed and accuracy. This wasn't just a fun concept. I truly believed it could revolutionize an industry. Naturally, in a moment of naive optimism, I shared my burgeoning idea with Brandon over one of our increasingly rare forced dinners. I carefully explained the concept, the market potential, the innovative use of AI. I watched his face for a flicker of interest, a hint of the supportive husband I once knew. Instead, his eyes glazed over, then narrowed with a familiar disdain. He took a sip of his wine, a slow, deliberate gesture before letting out a dismissive chuckle. An AI design platform? Vanessa, darling, are you still playing with your little art projects? He scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. That's incredibly niche. And frankly, a dime a dozen. You'll be lucky if anyone even looks at it. Stick to what you know. Interior decorating, maybe? That sneer, that casual dismissal of something I poured my heart into, acted like rocket fuel. It wasn't just a critique. It was a deep invalidation, a declaration that my intellectual pursuits were nothing more than trivial playtime. It hardened something inside me. All that gaslighting, all the subtle put-downs, this was the culmination, the final straw. Instead of crushing me, his mockery ignited a fierce determination. I was going to prove him wrong, not for his validation, but for my own. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. Over the next few months, while Brandon became increasingly consumed by his own declining ventures and continued to brush me off with practiced indifference, I threw myself headfirst into developing my platform. He was too busy chasing fleeting deals and spending money he didn't have to notice the quiet hum of my laptop late into the night, or the new books stacked on my bedside table, or the intense conversations I was having over coffee. I networked relentlessly. I haunted tech meetups and online forums, connecting with developers, data scientists, and early-stage investors. I devoured every piece of information I could find on AI ethics, user experience design, and scalable architecture. I started building a small, dedicated team, a handful of brilliant, passionate individuals who believed in my vision as much as I did. We worked remotely, collaborating across time zones, fueled by shared ambition and endless cups of coffee. What started as an escape evolved into a fully fledged, meticulously planned venture. I leveraged my burgeoning network to secure initial angel funding, small but significant investments from people who saw the potential I knew was there. It was exhilarating, terrifying, and utterly consuming. I learned to talk the talk of venture capitalists, to pitch with conviction, and to articulate my vision with clarity. While Brandon was busy continuing his financial misadventures, confidently sinking more money into what I now suspected was a failing automotive venture that he was trying to resurrect purely on ego, I was quietly, stealthily launching my startup. It wasn't a grand public unveiling. It was a soft launch, a beta version, gathering user feedback, iterating, refining. Every small victory, every positive user review was a silent testament to his monumental misjudgment. The code wasn't just salvation. It was my quiet revolution. He saw a hobby. I saw the foundation of an empire. And he had no idea that the soft launch of my platform gained traction quickly amongst early adopters and tech enthusiasts. What started as a trickle of interest soon became a steady stream. My team, small but mighty, worked tirelessly alongside me. We were coding late into the night, fueled by a shared passion and the intoxicating scent of impending success. Every positive user review, every glowing piece of feedback validated the long hours and quiet sacrifices. The beta users loved the AI-driven personalization and the intuitive interface. We were onto something big, and I felt it in my bones. Angel investors, initially cautious, became more enthusiastic after seeing our early metrics. Securing those initial rounds of funding was a crucial step, affirming my vision and giving us the capital to scale. I met with a parade of discerning individuals and small venture firms, each meeting a chance to refine my pitch, demonstrate progress, and articulate the vast potential of what we were building. They saw not just a promising startup, but a groundbreaking solution. All of this, every single step forward, transpired without Brandon having the slightest clue. He was too preoccupied with his own increasingly precarious financial situation, too self-absorbed to notice my clandestine calls or the quiet intensity in my eyes. I was a ghost in our own home, living a double life. During the day, I was the dutiful wife, managing the household, feigning interest in his convoluted business woes. At night, I transformed into the CEO, strategizing, coding, and building an empire. My laptop, carefully tucked away after midnight, became my secret weapon. It wasn't long before I started noticing alarming discrepancies in our joint accounts. Large sums of money were disappearing, far beyond our usual household expenses or even his legitimate business outlays. At first, I tried to rationalize it, attributing it to his supposed investments or perhaps an aggressive marketing campaign for his ailing automotive venture. But the numbers didn't add up. The withdrawals were inconsistent, sometimes huge, sometimes smaller but frequent, almost desperate. My stomach clenched with cold dread as I began to dig deeper, meticulously tracking every transaction, cross-referencing bank statements with credit card bills. What I uncovered was far worse than mismanagement. It was deliberate, reckless funneling. He wasn't just investing. He was systematically draining our shared resources, trying to prop up a failing enterprise that was clearly beyond salvation. He was siphoning off funds, essentially using our savings, our collective future, as a personal piggy bank to feed his insatiable ego and maintain the illusion of success. The betrayal cut deep, not just financially, but emotionally. This wasn't naive carelessness. It was a calculated act, presuming my ignorance and trust. He believed I wouldn't notice, or if I did, that I wouldn't understand the true gravity of his actions. But I noticed, and with every secret transaction I found, every penny he was wasting, my resolve strengthened. I started documenting everything. Screenshots of bank statements, dates and times of withdrawals, email correspondences I accidentally or conveniently stumbled upon, even scribbled notes on his desk. Every piece of evidence was meticulously cataloged, stored in encrypted files on a separate, hidden drive. This wasn't just about protecting myself financially. It was about building an ironclad case. I was carefully planning my exit, piece by agonizing piece. The silence I kept wasn't out of fear, but out of strategic necessity. He was playing a game he didn't even know he was losing. The financial discrepancies were too glaring, too persistent to ignore any longer. I knew the moment had come to confront Brandon, not with pleas or emotional appeals, but with the cold, hard facts I had painstakingly gathered. I laid out the evidence, the bank statements, the transaction reports, the undeniable proof of his reckless funneling of our joint funds into his failing ventures. I expected a flurry of excuses, perhaps even an attempt at charm or renewed gaslighting. Instead, he merely looked at the documents with a bored expression, then glanced up at me with that familiar, infuriatingly smug smile. "So, you've been playing detective, have you, Vanessa?" he said, his voice laced with condescension. "Look, I've been trying to keep us afloat, to salvage a situation that you clearly don't understand. This is complicated business, not your little arts and crafts projects." He then leaned back, a picture of false confidence. "If you want to leave, then leave. But be warned, Cinderella. Without me, you'll walk away with next to nothing. You won't have the lifestyle you're accustomed to. This house, the cars, all of it. It's tied to my ventures. And you have no career, no prospects of your own. You'll be broke." His confidence was so absolute, his condescension so ingrained, that he genuinely believed he held all the cards. He was convinced that without his wealth, his name, his supposed influence, I was utterly helpless. He expected me to crumble, to beg him to reconsider, to shrink back into the subservient wife he'd cultivated. He even alluded to his lawyers being far more formidable than any I could possibly afford. It was the opening I had been waiting for, the carefully set trap I was now ready to snap shut. I played along perfectly, feigning a look of distress, allowing a slight tremor in my voice as I responded, suggesting that perhaps he was right, that I had been foolish. I let him believe that he had thoroughly intimidated me, that his threats had landed precisely where he intended. I watched the triumph flicker in his eyes, cementing his false sense of victory. I even suggested he could keep the house, the luxury car, the assets that in his mind were the sum total of our marital property. Why fight over crumbs when you're baking a feast? In reality, for weeks, perhaps even months, before this confrontation, I had been diligently consulting with Clara Diaz, an attorney recommended by Renee. Clara was everything Brandon's Loy. R wasn't, discreet, sharp, and strategically brilliant. She quickly understood the delicate balance of my situation, the need to protect my burgeoning business while navigating a potentially hostile and arrogant opponent. Under Clara's expert guidance, I had worked tirelessly to protect my intellectual property and shares in my company, Visibler, as it was now officially named. We established a complex holding company structure, carefully insulating my ownership from any potential claims Brandon might try to make on marital assets. Every contract, every investment deal, every share allocation was meticulously reviewed and legally secured, ensuring it remained separate property, accrued before any legal intent to divorce was formally declared, and largely independent of our joint marital finances, especially considering his explicit mockery and disavowal of my hobby. The vows we exchanged years ago had indeed turned into a legal strategy, but not the one he anticipated. He saw me retreating, surrendering. I saw myself executing a precisely orchestrated plan. I was no longer the naive girl who believed in forever with him. I was a businesswoman, a founder, and a woman who had learned the hard way that sometimes the most powerful move you can make is to let your opponent believe they've already won. The stage was set, and the final act was fast approaching. The courtroom was a sterile, impersonal space filled with unspoken tension. I sat composed, my heart a steady drum against my ribs, a stark contrast to the churning emotions that had once consumed me in this marriage. Brandon, however, was practically vibrating with barely contained glee. He kept glancing over at me, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips, as if relishing my supposed defeat. He truly believed he was walking away with everything, and I nothing. When the moment came to sign the final divorce papers, he exaggerated the flourish of his signature, drawing it out as if savoring every letter. Then he let out a short, sarcastic chuckle, loud enough to cut through the quiet hum of the room, but not so loud as to incur the judge's immediate wrath. It was a calculated sound, designed to humiliate, to rub salt in a wound he thought was still fresh and festering. His eyes met mine across the table, sparkling with malice and a grotesque sense of victory. I could almost hear the thoughts in his head. You're finished, Vanessa. You're ruined. You're mine no more, and you have nothing. He believed he was walking away with the house, the car, and crucially, my dignity. He even had the audacity to make a theatrical show of adjusting his cufflinks while gathering his papers. As if leaving the courtroom were the conclusion of a successful business deal, I remained silent. A picture of calm resilience. My lawyer, Clara Diaz, sat beside me, her expression inscrutable, but I could feel her quiet confidence, a reassuring presence in the storm. As we exited the courtroom, Brandon's lawyer, slick, self-important man named Mr. Harrington, clapped him on the shoulder. "Well done, Brandon," he boomed, perhaps a little too loudly, catching the attention of a few lingering legal assistants. "Saved you a fortune, didn't we? Now, about that celebratory toast?" Brandon pulled a small, engraved silver flask from his jacket pocket and took a theatrical swig. "To new beginnings, Mr. Harrington," he declared, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, his eyes flitting to me again, daring me to react, "and to finally shedding dead weight." He even offered a dismissive gesture in my direction, a silent, cutting farewell. I said nothing. My silence wasn't submission. It was strategy. Every word he uttered, every visible display of his arrogance and relief, was ammunition. Clara had advised me to remain impassive, to let him dig his own grave with his hubris. And dig he did. Just as Brandon and his lawyer were about to make their grand exit from the courthouse, the judge's voice, calm and authoritative, boomed from the courtroom loudspeaker, amplified for clarity throughout the halls. "Hold on a moment, Mr. Langley. If you and Mrs. Langley would please return." Brandon paused mid-stride, a look of mild irritation flashing across his face. He exchanged a puzzled glance with Mr. Harrington, who seemed equally perplexed. They slowly turned and re-entered the courtroom, a hint of annoyance replacing their celebratory swagger. I followed, a serene smile almost touching my lips, taking my seat once more. The air crackled with a sudden, unexpected anticipation. Judge Raymond Carter cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. He gazed directly at Brandon, then at me. "Mr. Langley, Mrs. Langley, there's been a final addendum to the asset disclosure that needs to be officially read and acknowledged before the divorce can be finalized." Brandon scoffed, a barely audible sound. "An addendum, Your Honor?" I believe everything was settled. He sounded impatient, eager to be done. He had no idea the earthquake that was about to hit him. His victory lap was about to turn into a head-on collision. Judge Raymond Carter adjusted his glasses, his voice resonating with an impartial authority that commanded the room. Brandon, still smirking, leaned back, clearly expecting a dry legal formality, perhaps a minor correction on a utility bill. He had no idea what was coming. Regarding the revised asset disclosure pertaining to Mrs. Vanessa Langley, Judge Carter began, his gaze sweeping over the now silent room. My heart thrummed a quiet, steady rhythm. Clara, beside me, offered a faint, almost imperceptible nod. It has been brought to the court's attention, through verified documentation, that Mrs. Langley holds a significant stake in the technology startup, Visibler, Inc. Brandon's smirk faltered just a fraction. I saw a flicker of confusion cross his face. Visibler? I could almost hear him thinking that little hobby she had. The judge continued, unhurriedly, letting each word land with the weight of undisputed fact. As per the latest Series C funding round, which closed last week, Visibler Inc. has been valued at approximately $1.4 billion. A collective gasp rippled through the few people present in the courtroom. It was almost comical. Brandon, who had been lazily stretching, froze. His jaw went slack, his eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the judge. Mr. Harrington, his lawyer, dropped his pen onto the polished table, the clatter echoing in the sudden silence. Mrs. Vanessa Langley, Judge Carter continued, his voice unwavering, is the founder and holds an 82% equity stake in Visibler, Inc. This translates to a personal net worth, excluding marital assets, in excess of $1.1 billion. The air in the courtroom became thick, almost unbearable. Brandon looked like he'd been hit by a truck. The color drained from his face, leaving it ashen. His eyes darted to me, then back to the judge, then to his sputtering lawyer. He mumbled something incoherent, a choke sound utterly devoid of his earlier confidence. The man who had scoffed at my little art projects, who believed I would be penniless without him, was now confronted with a reality so far beyond his comprehension it rendered him speechless. His smug, arrogant facade shattered into a million pieces. Mr. Harrington stammered, scrambling to regain his composure. "Your Honor, surely there's been some mistake? A typing error? This is highly irregular." Judge Carter raised an eyebrow, his expression grave. "There is no mistake, Mr. Harrington. All documentation has been thoroughly vetted and verified. The valuation, the ownership percentages, the holding company structuring for Mrs. Langley's shares, all legally established and entirely separate from the marital estate. Given the timing of its inception and Mrs. Langley's independent efforts, it was priceless." The dawning horror on Brandon's face, the frantic whispers between him and his now visibly panicked lawyer. He finally understood. My hobby wasn't a hobby. It was the next unicorn tech empire. And I had built it in silence under his very nose, while he was busy tearing down our shared life and his own financial stability. I rose slowly, my composure unwavering, a quiet strength emanating from me. I met Brandon's gaze, devoid of anger or triumph, just a calm, definitive certainty. He had tried to break me, to leave me with nothing, but in his blind arrogance, he had paved the way for my monumental success. I walked out of that courtroom not just free from a toxic marriage, but wealthy beyond his wildest imagination, respected by a burgeoning industry, and utterly reborn. The woman he thought he'd crushed was standing tall, a billion-dollar woman. And the best part? He had absolutely no claim to any of it. My quiet strategic build had paid off. In spades, THE News, as they say, travels fast, especially when it involves billions of dollars, a dramatic courtroom reveal, and a husband's epic miscalculation. Within hours of the judge's pronouncement, whispers turned into headlines, and headlines exploded across every major business and tech publication. Savannah Bell turns tech titan, divorce reveals billion-dollar empire. The silence was golden. How Vanessa Langley built a unicorn while her husband undermined her. From mocked hobby to billion-dollar valuation, the Vanessa Langley story. And Brandon? He became an instant meme. The image of his slack-jawed, ashen face in the courtroom went viral, often accompanied by captions like, "When you thought you won the divorce, but she built a billion-dollar company," or "The face you make when her hobby is worth more than your entire legacy." He was dubbed, almost universally, the guy who laughed during the divorce. It was a level of public humiliation that even his family's old money couldn't buy him out of. His reputation, already fragile from his failing ventures, utterly collapsed. The schadenfreude was palpable and honestly a little sweet. For me, it wasn't about rubbing it in, though I won't deny a certain satisfaction. The focus quickly shifted from the divorce drama to the innovation behind Visibler. My platform was rapidly gaining recognition, attracting top talent and high-profile clients who saw its immense potential. I used this newfound platform not for personal attacks, but for positive change. One of my first major initiatives was establishing a mentorship program for women entrepreneurs. I remembered all too clearly Brandon's dismissive jokes about my little art projects, and I wanted to ensure other talented women didn't face similar devaluing. I started investing actively in female-led tech startups, particularly those in underserved communities. There's so much untapped potential out there, and I now had the resources to help cultivate it. Interviews flooded in, from Forbes to TouchCrunch to mainstream news channels. I made sure to consistently pivot the narrative from a personal revenge saga to a story of resilience, innovation, and the power of believing in your own vision, even when others try to dim your light. I became the face of silent strength, of finding your voice or your code and letting your success roar. They called it a heel turn, a transformation from the elegant Southern wife to a formidable tech mogul. For me, it was simply shedding a skin that no longer fit. I spoke about the importance of financial independence for women, about trusting your gut instincts, and about the quiet power of building something authentic and meaningful. My past experiences with Brandon, though painful at the time, became valuable lessons to share. They solidified my mission to empower others, particularly women, to pursue their ambitions without fear of being underestimated, dismissed, or financially vulnerable. Life has become a whirlwind of board meetings, product launches, philanthropic endeavors, and inspiring conversations. There's a new sense of purpose that permeates every aspect of my days. I've moved into a sleek, modern home overlooking the Atlanta skyline, a far cry from the traditional southern abode I once shared. It's filled with light, art, and the quiet hum of innovation. My team at Visibler is incredible, dedicated, brilliant, and passionate. And Renee and Clara, my two unwavering pillars of support, are still very much in my life, celebrating every milestone. This wasn't just a new beginning. It was an entirely new chapter written on my own terms, with my own code, and undeniably with my own strength. Looking back, it's clear that my journey wasn't just about winning a divorce or gaining financial freedom. It was about reclaiming myself. I didn't just win a legal battle. I built my empire in silence, brick by meticulous brick, code by painstaking line. The sweetest part wasn't the look on Brandon's face. Though that was a memorable bonus, it was the profound personal transformation that occurred within me. I learned the invaluable importance of trusting your instincts. That nagging feeling in my gut about Brandon, the subtle hints that something was off, the slow realization of his manipulative tactics. I initially dismissed them, gaslighted by his charm and my own desire for the fairy tale. But as I leaned into those feelings, as I dared to question and investigate, I found a guiding compass that led me to clarity and ultimately to liberation. Listen to that quiet voice inside you. It's often wiser than all the loud pronouncements around you. Never, ever let someone else dim your light, especially if that someone claims to love you. Brandon saw my passion for technology and design as a trivial hobby, a quaint pastime. He actively belittled it, convinced that my worth was tied to his approval and his provision. But your worth, your capabilities, your brilliance, they are inherent. They don't require external validation, and they certainly don't diminish under another's scorn. In fact, sometimes it's precisely that scorn that ignites a fierce fire within you, propelling you towards something greater than you ever imagined. Building in silence was not just a strategy, it was a sanctuary. While Brandon was busy creating noise and chaos, I was quietly cultivating growth. There's immense power in focusing on your craft, your vision, your personal development, away from the judgment and distraction of others. It allowed me to make mistakes, learn, pivot, and iterate without public scrutiny or the constant need for approval. It's in those quiet moments of focused dedication that true power is amassed. The ultimate revenge, I've come to realize, isn't about wishing ill upon others or engaging in petty public spats. It's success that roars after silence. It's building something so spectacular, so undeniable, that it speaks for itself. My revenge wasn't in punishing Brandon, but in proving to myself, and to anyone who might feel similarly underestimated, that true power lies in self-possession, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of your own potential. It's about creating a reality so divergent from what your detractors envisioned for you that their past dismissals become utterly irrelevant. Every day, I wake up grateful, not for riches, but for the clarity, the purpose, and the freedom I found. I get to work on something I love with people I admire and contribute to a world I believe in. That, to me, is the true wealth. So, to everyone who's watched this journey, thank you for sharing it with me. If my story resonates, if it inspires even one person to trust their instincts, to nurture their dreams in defiance of negativity, or to quietly build something extraordinary, then every challenge I faced was worth it. Remember, sometimes the greatest breakthroughs happen when you're forced to find strength you didn't know you had. The best chapters of your life are often written after the ones you thought would define you.